Yeah.
Yeah, and so welcome everyone. We're recording now. This is a very tough audience. The last presentation I did on Zen Buddhism, I think I practiced it 2 or 3 times. I didn't do quite. I wasn't quite that diligent this time. But anyway, I was thinking the other night. I woke up at 3 a.m. as we often do, and I was trying to remember the name of a professor I had at my first stint at graduate school up in Boston, not very long after the Peace Corps. And I took a seminar on Northeast Asian ethnography. And I couldn't remember the professor's name. I could remember most of my other graduate school professors' names from that era, but I couldn't remember. And I remembered his first name was John, and I thought his second name started with a P. And I actually Googled on my phone, and it was John. I didn't remember. I went back to sleep. When I woke up, Pelzel was in my brain. But I took a seminar with John Pelzel, and he wrote a couple influential articles about Japanese religion and things like that. Anyway, but we read the ethnography of these Northeast Asian groups like the Buryat, the Chukchi, the Tungus, and so forth. And all the literature was available in the libraries, and it was all filled with shamanism. Because the word shaman actually derives from Siberia, back in, I guess, the 18th and 19th century, as ethnographers, anthropologists did research in Siberia. They started collecting information about shamanism. So the characteristics of Siberian shamanism sort of became the standard definition of shamanism. But the word shaman, like totem and caste and a bunch of other words, originated in one context, but then got expanded, to somewhat different contexts around the world. So you might speak of shamanism in North America, shamanism in Korea, shamanism in Indonesia, Africa, or wherever. And, it might have some of the characteristics of Siberian shamanism, but not all of them. Okay. That was a long sentence. Anyway, so I got interested my first time in graduate school in shamanism and started reading a little bit. There wasn't much available at that time in English anyway about Korean shamanism. And then when I came back to Korea in 1970, and I've been pretty much living here since then, although I've spent some periods in Japan, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years, I'm not sure. But anyway, I've been mostly in Korea since 1970. And when I came back, I was very interested in shamanism. Whenever I heard, I had it right here a second ago. I can't play this for you later for some reason, but you couldn't hear that?
Uh,
Well, you could hear it before, Ned. I don't know why I can't hear it now. Anyway, I was playing some shaman music from a video clip that I'll probably show you in a bit. But whenever I'd hear the drums and the cymbals and so forth, I would head. And I became a sort of genius at getting invited into shaman rituals. There's a technique that I developed. You look very mild, but very interested and studious, and you bow a couple times, and you just stand there in a non threatening way. And eventually they invite you in. Okay. But I have, probably been to who knows how many, 50 or 100 of these shaman rituals over the years. And many times I've taken students with me on sort of field trips, where we've gone to shaman rituals around Seoul. So I know a bit, about the shamanism up in this area, in Gyeonggi province and Seoul. But I don't know so much about the hereditary shamanism. More about that in just a second, which exists in some other parts of Korea where some of you may have been in the Peace Corps. So I thought I'd just introduce a little. Some of you know a lot about shamanism, and some of you probably not so much. So I thought I'd just do a brief introduction to shamanism and then talk about death rites. Death rites are, of course, exciting and fun for people of our age. Okay, so let me see. Share the screen. I hope something works today. Okay, this is probably it. Okay. Okay, this is just some presentation I made some years ago, and I thought I'd, bring it up. There's two types of Korean shamans, okay? And Koreans use the word mu, which means shaman from Chinese wu, I think. But they use mu to describe both of them, but they're quite different. And even though they're quite different, in my classes, I usually refer to the northern style, which is depicted right here, which involves a spirit illness. They call it, mubyong, shinbyong, different shaman illness, spirit illness. And those shamans get called. They go a little crazy and they exhibit certain symptoms. And to alleviate those symptoms, they have to get apprenticed to a shaman, and that shaman becomes a spirit mother and will teach them, how to control the spirits and contact various spirits until eventually they're initiated. And even after their initiation, the spirit daughters often appear, and perform in rituals together with their spirit mothers. This is the northern style, and it's called Kangshin Mu. Kang means to descend, spirit, Shin means spirit, and Mu means shaman. So spirit descended shamans are ecstatic shamans. That didn't work, did it? Yes, it did. Give it a second. And the second type of shamans, so traditionally the Han River was the dividing line between the more charismatic shamans to the north, the ones I just talked about, and then this second type, the hereditary quote unquote shamanesses, who are in the southern provinces and also over on the East Coast. Okay. And they're called in Korean, this means hereditary. It's one of the words that means hereditary, sesup mu. Okay. Same mu, and sesup means hereditary. And they are born into shaman families traditionally, that were considered sort of low class, but necessary, for the community. And what would happen is a son of a hereditary shaman family would be married to the daughter of another, hereditary shaman family in another village, usual marriage practices, right? In another village. And then the daughter-in-law would come in and learn all, she'd already know some of the rituals from her mother, her biological mother that she grew up with, who was also an hereditary shaman. And then, but she would learn from her mother-in-law the particulars of the shaman tradition, the ritual tradition that her mother-in-law was involved in. And the men of the family would be musicians, so from birth they would be learning how to play, the folk music instruments. They'd be dancing, and so this was a family hereditary tradition, and they had pan districts, where they presided over. So I call them in class priestesses, to distinguish them from the shamans that get possessed, the first type, okay, the charismatic or Kangshin Mu. They do not experience possession. I'll tell you later when we get to death rites, there is some possession that occurs, but, from the dead person. But it is not the priestess that becomes possessed. It will be a family member or a neighbor who is, easily possessed by spirits or gets spontaneously possessed by the spirit of the dead person. But in the northern tradition, the shamans, that's their gift, is becoming possessed by all sorts of spirits, by, gods, heavenly spirits, earthly spirits, the spirits of the deceased. And so they regularly, every segment of a ritual, they're getting possessed by one spirit or another. In a death ritual, of course, they're often getting possessed by the spirit of the person who just died. Okay, let's go on. I'm not going to do too much of this. Don't worry. Okay, so there's various types of kut or spirit rituals, and the most common type is called a chesu kut, which means for good luck or prosperity. And those kut are divided into usually about 10 segments. Okay, there are also, of course, death rites, and that's what I'm going to talk about later. And up in the soul area, the death rites are called chino-gi, and sometimes it's spelled gui, chino-gi or chino-gui. This one is easier to pronounce. Okay, and then there are darikut. Dari means bridge. Okay, and that's up in one of the northern provinces. So there are various death rites that are performed also down in the hereditary districts as well. And all of these, death rites pacify the souls of the deceased and escort them to the other world. Anthropologists have often said that funeral rites, burial rites have two complementary functions. One is to ensure a peaceful transition for the dearly departed, and the other is to protect the living people from the dead. And so both of these things are accomplished in these death rites. Take a breath, Frank. Okay, and then there are healing rites. I've seen a couple of those, where someone who has either physical or psychological symptoms. The ones with psychological symptoms, they're sometimes called Michin Kut, crazy person Kut, but they're also called, Uhan, which is probably more polite. Then there's the Nerim Kut. Nerim means to descend. And so this is the initiations that shamans undergo. And I've been lucky enough to see 2 or 3 of those. Now, the kut, or the larger shaman ritual up in the northern tradition, that's the tradition I most know. I've read about the southern hereditary traditions. I read about it. I'm still reading about it. I learned more about it preparing for this talk, but the ones that I know much better are the ones from up here, because I've attended many of them, and taken notes and lost the notes and taken notes again and so forth. Okay, so the kut are divided into kodi or segments. Okay, and what should be next, most of them have 12 segments, but others, like the death rites, have more segments. They have a traditional 9 or 10 segments, and then they add another 8 or 9 that specifically care for in one way or another for the soul of the deceased. Now, the common kodi, and a lot of these kodi also exist in the hereditary tradition. Okay, but I'm talking about the northern tradition more here, is the Chosang kodi, which are the ancestors. That's an ancestor rite, a segment of a ritual. Then there's the one for the Buddhist or nature deities, and that would not the mountain spirit, but it would be Cheso kodi is for the Buddhist spirits. Chilsong cider, you remember, is the 7 spirit. That's the Big Dipper spirit. And Pulsa means Buddhist sage kodi. And these are sort of connected. So at a particular kut, they may call it the Chilsong Kodi, or they may call it the Cheso Kodi or the Pulsa Kodi. But in any case, they're related, and sometimes in a segment, the shaman will have 2 or 3 layers of robes and will change the hats and change the robes as she goes through 2 or 3 of these related spirits. Okay? So, in other words, for each Kodi, for each segment, there are different clothes, that are dedicated to the spirits that are being worshiped or venerated in those segments. And so the shaman may have on, let's say, for example, may have on a white robe, which is, the Chesok monk's outfit, and then she might take off that hat, put on a gray hat, put on a gray robe over her white robe, and then she becomes the Buddhist sage spirit, because they're related spirits all in the same segment. More detail than you wanted. Okay. Next, there's a Daegam spirit. And some of you, like who have been in Korea, you've seen in shops or highway construction in the old days, not these days, you'll see a table set up with a pig's head, and a bottle of makgeolli and so forth. And this is generally to the Daegam spirit. The Daegam spirit is a sort of earth spirit, the landlord of the construction site, the landlord of the shop that's doing business, and in a regular family ritual, the Daegam spirits wear special robes and a black hat, right? Usually a blue vest, a black hat and so forth. The Daegam spirit loves pigs, very greedy spirit, and so usually there might be a full gutted pig on the altar, or there might be a pig's head or pig's hoofs or something. And this spirit, the reason the spirit's so dang greedy is it's in charge of wealth and prosperity. So if you have a wealth agent, you want the agent to be greedy. So the spirit, when it appears, when the shaman hops up and down and becomes possessed by the Daegam spirit, the spirit starts complaining through the mouth of the shaman. Why aren't there more offerings on this table? Why aren't there more musicians? You can't afford more than one string musician, for an illustrious Daegam like myself? Enough of that. Okay, then there are warrior spirits, military spirits, and Xinjiang. Ned probably knows this word from the Koryo period. Do you, Ned? Don't say anything. The Xinjiang is a warrior. It was a military rank traditionally, and one of the most familiar or common ones is the Obang Xinjiang Nim. Obang meaning the 5 directions. There's 5 directions in Asia, the 4 cardinal directions plus center. Okay, so the 5 directional warrior spirit is the one that exorcises unwelcome spirits. With special robes and hats. There's the standard possession. Okay, these are mountain spirits. And they'll read a list. These segments, the shaman will do a kind of slow dance where she chants out the names of, dozens of mountain spirits in Korea, and then, she's wearing a red hat and red robes. I say she, it's occasionally a male, and she'll start, the drum beat will pick up, and she'll start hopping. And the hopping signifies that the spirit is descending. When she stops hopping, she is now the spirit. The spirit has possessed her. And when she speaks in a somewhat different cadence. And she is now the words of the spirit that has possessed her. and other assistant shamans will say to the woman who is who's representing the family and sponsoring the ritual, why are you standing there like a telephone pole? Start bowing. This is a spirit. This is no longer your friend, the shaman, your regular shaman. This is now, the mountain spirit. Let's I don't know how to go beyond that. So shamans have a call, a spirit illness. It includes hallucinations, somatic. They see gods when they're asleep and awake. They have physical symptoms, including gastrointestinal maladies and so forth. They have spirit mothers, who help them gain mastery, teach them, and initiate them in a nadium kut. Okay, so this is a typical shrine. I haven't gone to this, I don't know if this shrine is still operating, but for years I used to take students here. And this is a typical shrine. It's a fairly small room. This is the mountain spirit in the beginning with a tiger, of course. And there are lots of offerings on the main altar, and this little altar over here is to the ancestors, and the larger altar is to the gods or the spirits, and those are Buddhist shaman. This is a close up of the mountain spirit. This is a painting in the back of the mountain spirit. These are the you can see the apprentice shamans, or one of the shamans will play the drum for the other shaman who's doing a particular segment of the rite. And this would be a shaman. These are all the different robes of the different spirits, that will be donned by the shamans in particular segments. Fascinating, huh? This is a statue at the back of the shrine. This is more. Now let me look here. I'll just show you this. This is a shaman. These photos are from a long time ago, okay? But some of the later ones are more recent. But this is the Buddhist, this is the Chesok outfit. It's kind of white Buddhist robes with a white Buddhist cowl or cap, with blue and red belts or sashes. And she's beginning to dance there. Now, I had some notes here. Just 1 second, please, where I have to go to. 708. Give me 1 second, okay? I have to go for. Can you see that? That's me years ago with a bunch of shamans. Okay, hold on. Stop it. This is a picture of me. Can you see it? The photo? This is a picture of me
you
some
looked
years
pretty good back then.
Well, yeah, I still look good, Russ. But anyway, yeah, that's me, younger me in the middle. And this woman here was actually a friend of mine. It's not easy to become friends with shamans, especially when you're a male, and many of them are females. Most of them are females. But she was actually a good friend of mine. And these were her spirit daughters. One of the women, this woman was a student of mine, who was interested in anthropology, and she accompanied me to this rite. And these are all shamans that are spirit daughters of this woman. Okay, I'm trying to find. What was I trying to find? 708. Just a minute. 6. Okay. 708. Okay.
Almost.
What's that? What's Ross?
Almost. You're at 710 there.
Yeah, okay. Well, this will be good enough. This is the Obang Xinjiang spirit, wearing, blue and red robes with a black hat. These are the 5 directional flags. Each color represents a different direction, and they wrap the flags up and point the sticks at you. This is after you've made a donation, okay? Of these days, I would think at least 10,000 won, maybe 50. And anyway, you point to one of the sticks and they unroll the flag. This is while they're possessed normally, right? And that flag indicates something about your spiritual situation. So the white flag is good, but the best flag is the red flag, which is the flag for the South. And green is the same as black, for the five color directions. And usually in shamanism, instead of having a black flag, they have a green flag. And the green flag is north. And north is the direction of water and death. And if you pull the green flag a couple times in a row, that means there's death surrounding you. So I had a woman, an American woman, a middle-aged woman, in one of my classes. And when we were visiting a shrine, we always would take a gift. That's another thing. Remember, I was telling you about being a genius and getting in? If you're carrying an expensive bottle of whiskey, very, ostentatiously hugged to your chest, they invite you in much more quickly. And that bottle goes on to the altar, and then they can fight about it later. Who's going to take the bottle home? The housewife or the shaman or whatever. Sometimes they break it open. Sometimes a clever shamanist will be possessed, right? And the bottle's been put on the altar. When I've come in, perhaps with some students, and when the shaman gets possessed, by a general spirit, usually a martial spirit. They're the big drinkers. She'll say, open that up. She'll just gesture at it, and somebody will open the bottle. And at one of these kut that I was at, the nice bottle of whiskey we brought, the shaman drank like about 5 or 6 shots, in rapid succession while she was possessed. And then she came around. My students and I were sitting in a semicircle, and she came around and gave each of us, a cup of whiskey. And I had quit drinking at that point, right? And so when the shaman came up to me with the assistant shaman, she handed me the bowl, and I gestured and said, no, I'm not drinking. And she lifted the bottle and started pouring, so I had to lift the bowl, and then it was in a little cup, I guess it was, and I put it to my lips, and then she threw it into my mouth. And so I had some drinking problems, right? So I thought, I got to get this out of my mouth, right? So I'm getting ready to jump out, bolt out of the room, and spit the whiskey out. And the assistant shaman shovels some namul, some food into my mouth, and the whiskey goes down my throat. And I felt it in my ears. It was the best thing I've ever tasted in my life, but the heat only lasted for a minute, and then it went back. The heat receded. That's enough about me. Okay. We were talking about shamans, right? This is an exorcism. I'm sorry. Can I go back very easily? I'm not sure. Yep. Hold on. There we go. Stop it. Okay, what they do, this is again the Xinjiang spirit that I told you is in charge of exorcisms, and this is the couple that are sponsoring this rite. Okay, and what they've done is they've put the directional flags over the heads of the husband and wife, and then they're making noise. They're banging instruments. They're spitting makali over their heads. They're pelting them with rice and barley and beans. And all of this is to drive out, to exorcise the spirits. That's an artistic photo. Okay, I wanted to go ahead. The next place I wanted to go was 742. I'm close there, right? Okay. Oh, just this. This is a friend of mine, was a friend of mine. I haven't seen him for many years. This is, and he may have passed away or retired. I've never seen him anymore. But this is a well-known male shaman in Korea, and he's balancing a pig. And he's a martial spirit of some sort. He's got the red hat, but the blue robes. And this is a gutted pig. And when they balance a pig's head or a whole pig or a chicken or whatever they balance, it's hard to balance it, but they always are able to balance it. And when they balance it, that means it's a good sign. It's an auspicious spiritual sign. And what he will do, and other shamans as well, once he gets it balanced, he'll smack it as hard as he can and it won't move because, the spirit is in charge of things, of course. Another thing that the military spirits, martial spirits, will do when they're possessed. These are the chaktu, those sharp fodder cutter knives, and this shaman is possessed, and he's striking these sharp blades against his arm, to show that he's impervious, to harm while possessed. He's a master of the blades. And later they dance. You'll see in a minute, they dance on those blades. There he is on top of the blades with the whole pig on his shoulders. Amazing. Those are two sharp bolted together blades, and he's standing with a gutted pig on his shoulders. Now, this is at another shrine, a shrine that I was just at a few weeks ago. This is a shrine that I started coming to more often because they have about 15 different rooms, where 5 or 7 or 10 of them might be filled, with shamans performing different rituals. And the shamans will come out into the courtyard, to do some of the more dramatic parts of the rituals. So this is on a field trip. You can see a pig in the background. This is a shaman who has already been dancing inside the room. She's a martial spirit, a military spirit, and she's possessed. And she comes out into the courtyard. There are some concrete stairs where they've put the chaktu, the sharp blades up there. And what she's doing, you notice she's barefoot, which is not so common in Korea, but she's washed her feet. Okay, let's watch a bit of it. And so now she's ascending the stairs. She gets up. She gets up on the blades. And when, I forgot to say this earlier, when shamans are possessed by a spirit, they invariably present oracles, messages from the gods. And these oracles in Korean are called gongsu. And in this case, when she's up on the chaktu, she'll turn around all 4 directions, giving different messages, from the white horse general or whatever martial spirit is thought to have possessed her. There's certain martial spirits that are good at riding the blades here. Okay, and so that's some of the basics that I wanted to show you about shamanism. Okay, does anybody have any questions before we move on to death rites? You got all these different segments, and let's is it going okay so far? Okay, thank you, Maria. I'll never forget your name again. Okay, so if we go to this PowerPoint, let me try. Okay, so I should be able to make this bigger, and I should be able to select slideshow, play from the start. There we go. Okay, so this is a PowerPoint that I originally put together for one of my classes, and I've revised it a few times, and I made a number of revisions for today. Okay, I try to stay busy. Okay, so I'm going to present in Korea. I talked about the difference between the god descended shamans and the hereditary shamans. And I call the hereditary shamans priestesses, and I call the god in my classes, the god descended shamans, I refer to as shamans. But you could argue for using the word shaman because it's all one tradition. The same gods are venerated and propitiated, in these shaman rites. Many of the same epic stories, and the same spiritual figures are prayed to or actually appear in these rites. So what I have here is three. The Chinogi, you probably remember. Where is that common? The Chinogi death rites. The word may be out that I don't fail students. That's true. But still, you ought to try to answer something correctly.
South.
North. This is the Seoul. This is the Seoul area. They call it the Chinogi-gut, and I think the Hanyang-gut is for a very high class Yangban segment. I used to know the troop that was the intangible property in charge of the Hanyang-gut. Okay, and I actually I befriended one of the musicians, and he talked to my class once, and so forth. But anyway, this presentation. I probably won't get through all of it. You'll be happy to hear. But the first one is the northern style that I know the best, the Seoul style. Shitkim is down in the Chola provinces. It means cleansing. And these are all death rites. And sumang means death by drowning. And this is in the southeastern part of Korea. So I think I'll present the Chinogi-gut, and then I'll skip over the Shitkim. It's a very famous one, and give you just a little bit about the sumang or the drowning kut of the, down a little bit above Busan. Okay, so let's get going here. How do I do this? Okay, hold on. I should be able to I should be able to there we go. Okay, so I already told you all about this. Okay, this is the difference between the Chinogi kut and the cleansing kut, the northern tradition versus the southern tradition. And it's only the spirit descended, the Kangshin shamans, who go in to trance. I'll come back to that a little later. So the Chinogi-gut, it's spelled up here, and it's held in Seoul and Gyeonggi province. It has 17 of these segments or kori, more than the typical 12. The first 9 are normal kori, the ancestor segment, the household spirit segment, the Daegam spirit, the mount, and so forth. Perhaps the Buddhist spirits. And then the next 7 are for the deceased soul. And the last one is the normal concluding segment. The parts for the death rite include segments, kodi, there's variation, right, from one ritual to the next, from one shaman to the next, but they generally include segments for the 10 kings of the underworld, the death messenger, the Saja spirit, and prince's body Kongju. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Okay. And other segments are the Toryong, or the circumambulation around an effigy of the deceased person, cloth bridges that are seen as what? Paths to the other world. and descending spirit rites. Now, let me just make a short injection here. Apparently, in East Asia, in Korea and China and so forth, before Buddhism came, the basic distinction was between this world and the other world, that world. In Korea, that is Chosun Isung. Isung, our world, Chosun, the other world. And so when you died, people went over to the other world, usually visualized as mountaintops, horizons of the sea, and so forth, different passages to the underworld. And there, they lived in villages, much like people live today. But the world of the underworld or the other world. But what happened is when Buddhism came into China, excuse me, I do have a cough drop. I was never a Boy Scout, but the tell me what I was talking about. When Buddhism came into China, I always need one student who can do that for me. But when Buddhism came into China, in the early Common Era centuries, Buddhism brought with it a code of morality, and the idea of perhaps punishment for people who have violated the moral codes. Okay, so what happened is there developed an idea in China. This actually originated in China, where Mount Tai, one of the 5 sacred mountains of China, was thought, King Tai, the king of that mountain, was thought to preside over the underworld. But when Buddhism came, this got conflated with Buddhist ideas of judgment in another world. Okay, there are many different, Buddhist conceptions of these things. So let me see what I have next. I'm not quite sure. I'll come back to that. Maybe not. Okay, so what happened is the idea developed that there was an underworld. This is out of Buddhism, okay? There was an underworld presided over by a king of the dead, Yomna Dewang, King Yomna in Korea, and known by different names in Japan and China. And the underworld was divided into 10 levels. There were different numbers, 17 levels, 10 levels, 7 levels, but 10 levels was the most common one. So when somebody died, their soul would go to the bottom level and be judged by the king of that level. The 10 kings of the underworld, would be judged by that king according to how virtuous their life had been in one respect to one moral dictum or another. All right. And so this idea spread throughout East Asia. And, I'll show you some pictures in a moment, but in Korea, it's a part of Buddhism. And there's a bodhisattva. Everybody remember what bodhisattvas are? Bosal in Korean, bosalim. But bodhisattvas are Buddhist entities that could have become Buddhas, but they've remained behind, like the Catholic saints, until everyone is saved. I don't know if the Catholic saints, wait around that long, but anyway, in Buddhism they do. And so one of the most famous, Bobby, is Jizo. And in Japan, what is Jizo connected with, in addition to guarding the entrances of villages? Any idea? No? Jizo is thought to be a bodhisattva who escorts the souls to the other world in Buddhism. Okay? And in Korean, the Chinese characters for Jizo are Jijang. So Jijang Bosal is the bodhisattva, and you'll have halls in Buddhist temples. I have more on this later. Okay, this is from Michael Pettit's edited book, and he wrote an article about the Chino Gui Kut. And I don't know if you can see this very well. I took a picture of it with my camera, but these are all of the segments that he observed. What he says are these are often included in the Chinogi Kut. And you can see this is the purification one. This is the mountain spirits, the smallpox spirit, the Dagon, the official spirit, the Buddhist spirits, the household spirit, a military spirit, the performers or clown spirits, and so forth. From here, right to the 10 kings, the cloth bridge, the messengers of the underworld, the right to prince's body or padi, and the sundering or tearing of the hemp cloth, and so forth. These are all special rites for the death, for a death ritual. This is a book, a series. It's old. This was published in the 80s. Okay. And, I bought most of them years ago, and it's all in Korean. There's not any English. You have to read it in Korean. But this is a map of some 20 different rituals that this series had a book for each ritual. And what you see, you all remember how to read Korean, right? If you look from here, number 4 to number 8, these are all death rites, and you can find on the map where those rites are. So I mentioned where is it? Sumang. Where'd it go? Somebody find it for me. Here it is. Number 4 is here, down in Gyeongsan-namdo, and, above Busan. And the Shitkim-gut is number 6 down here, in the, what's the name of the island there? Shitkim. Well, they call it here Chola-do, but it's actually, what's the name of the
Chindo.
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 Thank you, Russ. The Chindo area, and so forth. So, up Sumang is the one we just talked about. Tadi is up north, number 5. Tadi is the bridge to the underworld. That's also a death rite. Shitkim is the cleansing. In Jeju, Muhongut is a spirit for a drowned person. Okay. So this gives you an idea of the variety of rituals, shaman rituals. And let's just go on. What's next? So, do you guys remember when in the Peace Corps, when I was in the Peace Corps and in the 70s, I can remember several times walking along those little narrow alleys, seeing a table that had been set outside of the gate of a residential compound. There was a little table with 3 bowls of rice. And I think they had paper white hats that were over the bowls of rice. I couldn't find a picture of it yesterday. Anybody see that? I saw it some 3 or 4 times.
Many times.
Anybody see it? Russ, you saw it?
Sure, more than once.
Okay,
Several
good.
times, actually.
So Russ is testifying here that I'm not making this stuff up, okay? And
In Chuncheon, Gangwon-do, where I was, the back streets, alleyways.
yeah, sure. And what this is, the Korean funerals are essentially Confucian, based on Song Dynasty, handbooks and so forth. But this is, I don't think it comes out of the handbook. I think this was a concession made to native beliefs. But what they do, and the reason they put it outside of the gate, this is the death messenger. The Saja spirit or spirits are the spirit that accompany the soul of the dead to the underworld. And so you want to honor those spirits, by putting that little table out, but you don't want to put it inside the compound. because these death messengers are not all that welcome, to come in and run amok. So you put the table outside. I don't think Charlie Goldberg is here, but we mentioned in a previous presentation somehow, or discussion we were having, that the famous Korean movie director, in his movie Festival, Chukje, has a scene. It's all about the hero, the main character's mother's funeral, in a traditional, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And there's a table set up for the death messenger, and little village kids are getting ready to steal the rice. And some uncle, a male character in the movie, yells at them, "Don't touch those offerings. They're for the death messengers." Okay. So in shamanism, I've seen, that male shaman I showed you a little earlier, I saw him act the death messenger, a Cody, a segment dedicated to the death messenger. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of that, but I have a photo of another death ritual that I observed, where I'm going to show you in a second, the death messenger. In shamanism, the death messenger is portrayed as a greedy character who's going to try to kidnap the soul and take it away. And you want to protect the deceased from this death messenger. So the one that the male, Mr. Bach, was involved in, he did a wonderful job. But what it was, a little boy who was the eldest son of the eldest son of a family that wasn't doing very well. This is about 20 or 30 years ago, okay? Had been run over by a construction truck. And Mr. Pak told me, when I arrived unannounced at this death ritual, he got me invited in as usual. But he was very nice to me, this gentleman. But he told me, "I'm doing this almost for free." I felt so sorry, for this unfortunate family. And so when Pak was possessed by the death messenger, the Saja spirit, there was a paper effigy of the dead boy that had been put on the altar, that shrine, the same shrine I showed you the photo of earlier. And the effigy, the white paper effigy, had been put on the altar, and the younger family members, the father of the boy, not the grandfather and grandmothers, but I mean the sort of younger generations, they formed a line in front of the altar. And Pak, possessed by the death messenger, had a roll of cotton that he was trying, to throw over the heads of the protectors in order to kidnap, this is all symbolic, of course, to kidnap the soul of the dead boy. And it was like a soccer game. These were the goalies, and what they did is they successfully, prevented the death messenger, from kidnapping the soul. Now, I want to show you now a photo. This is a death messenger. Usually the shamans wear hats, but in the ancestor segment, and in this particular segment, the death messenger segment, they don't wear a hat, but they wear like a hempen cloth tied around, for death, symbolizing death, around the head. You can see money has been stuck into the headdress. The shaman's mouth is full of rice cake. And why is she eating so impolitely? Students? Because I'll start the answer. Because the death messenger I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Now, the death messenger is a greedy, dim-witted spirit in shamanism, in this form of shamanism, that is intent on capturing the soul of the dead person. And the whole idea of this is to protect the soul from this greedy spirit. So I talked to you a little bit earlier about the concepts of hell. So with the Buddhist, there was, Yomna Dewang. When a couple of my friends died, Ned Schultz knows one of them, Ned Miller. When a couple of my friends died in a drunken traffic accident that I was supposed to be with them. This is before I quit drinking. When they died in this accident, my father-in-law, who has since passed away, my father-in-law told me, I guess Yomna Dewang decided it wasn't yet your time. So I mean, that's how it's embedded into traditional Korean culture. The king of hell decided, he took your friends, but it wasn't your time yet. And I'm grateful for that. The Shiwang are the 10 kings. Jijang, I told you, is Jizo in Japan. The Jijang Bosal is the Bodhisattva in Buddhism that escorts souls to the underworld, to hell. So, the Chinese spirits got represented as, bureaucratic officials. And so what happened in China is, the king of hell, Yomna in Korean, gets portrayed as such, as an official. This is the king of hell. Oh, sorry. These are the 10 kings of hell. Okay, in another kind of Buddhist depiction. And so if you count across, the fifth one, this is Yomna. This is the king of hell. So why? And there are stories that he used to be the first one, but he got demoted, even though he's still the king of hell. He got demoted to the fifth level because he was too sympathetic to the souls of the dead. A kind of self-serving story, I guess. This is a Buddhist temple. This is Magoksa. I took Charlie Kelly, Russ. I took Charlie and his wife down to Magoksa not too long ago when he was in Korea. They were in Korea. But anyway, this is a hall to Jizo or Jijang, to the and this is Jijang Bosal. And you know that most of the Bosals wear crowns. They wear headdresses. But Jijang is like a Buddha, but with usually this picture, it doesn't look, but it's almost always green hair. And this is his hall. And so he's surrounded by the 10 kings of hell. And this is part of Buddhism. And so I'm shifting gears a little bit, giving you some cultural background to things that appear in shaman ceremonies as well. This is also from Magok Sa. These are, some of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the kings of the underworld. And these smaller pictures are attendants of one sort or another. And this is from my home temple here in Seoul, but this is a picture from the same hall. The hall is called by different names, by the way. It's called the Myeongbu Hall. It's called the Jijang Hall. There's different names for the hall. But this is a picture, of the corner of the hall. And these are the kings. They're seated, and these are standing attendants. So what we're talking about is what? The kings of hell that also appear. Now, Prince's body. How am I doing? Oh my gosh. Prince's body, also called body degi, the abandoned body. Prince's body is one of the most famous legendary epics in Korean history. And, usually referred to as Body Kongju. And there are 50 some versions of this epic tale. And Prince's body is considered to be, the mother of shamans. She takes care of the dead and so forth, because the legend about her, she's the 7th daughter born to a king and his queen. And the king had had 6 daughters, and of course had prayed for a son. And when the 7th daughter was born, he believed that he had to sacrifice this daughter, to the gods in order to have a son. Well, they abandoned Princess Body, and some family took her in, kind of like Moses, right? Took her in and cared for her, but the king never had a son. And her 6 sisters, they grew up, in the palace with their husbands, and then the mother and father became, deathly ill, and they were told that somebody had to go on an adventurous journey to the underworld to bring back medicinal water, yaksu of some sort, that would rejuvenate and restore, the parents. And the 6 sisters all together said, "No way, we're not going." And their husbands said together, "No way, we're not going either." And Princess Body announced herself at the king's court. "I am your 7th daughter, Princess Body, the one, that you abandoned. I am here to go to the other world, and to bring back the restorative medicine." And she did, and she had all these adventures, and these stories are told. This is the Body Degi Kodi. This is the Prince, Body Kongju Kodi of a death rite in the northern tradition. And Princess Body, they'll chant the entire epic, okay, the epic story. In the southern tradition, it supposedly takes 2 or 3 hours. I've seen it done in the northern tradition, around Seoul, where it usually takes about 30 to 60 minutes to tell this tale of Princess Body. So I'm going to show you a couple photos from my, this is a picture from long ago. This is a shaman possessed by Princess Body. And this is her headdress, the princess's headdress. This is yet another shaman in a shrine, and you see these paper effigies include the effigy of the dead person, and this is called the circumambulation or toriongori. And here the Princess Body leads the family members who are all holding candles and other things, and they proceed around the table several times. I've seen this, like 4 or 5. I've been lucky. I think I've seen at least 4 or 5 of these death rituals. That means I've gone to a lot of them, right? That I had that sort of good luck. But anyway, I think in one of these, I was in the procession. They said, "Why don't you join?" And I got in the procession, holding a candle or something or other, and we go around the table. And of course, this is symbolizing the trip to the other world. And its culmination, there's another picture. And the culmination is a later Kodi that all of these death rites have, whether they're Southern tradition, Northern tradition, or what. And what they do is sometimes they have 2. They have a silk cloth, which symbolizes the path from the underworld. No, I'm sorry. They have a hempen cloth path, which symbolizes the road from the underworld to this world. Then they do a second one with a silken cloth that represents the passage from this world to paradise. And the shaman, with or without a knife, will cut this path in 2. And you see there's money. People have put offerings, just like the story about the river Styx and so forth. You need money, to bribe your way into the other world and so forth. But anyway, I remember that Mr. Pak on one of these, the one I was telling you before, where he was the death messenger, he was standing by as another shaman divided the second bolt of cloth. going to paradise. And I remember Pac said to everybody there, it's over. He's gone now. The little boy is gone now. The little boy, has been transported to paradise. And by the way, when I'm almost finished, in that same rite that I just told you about, I unfortunately don't have a picture of Pac as the death messenger, but this shaman started out the ritual. I stayed for the whole ritual, I think. But this was another shaman whom I didn't know. And I think it was because it was toward the beginning of the ritual. It was probably called the ancestor segment. But instead of all the different ancestors presenting themselves, bilaterally, wife's family, deceased members, as well as husband's family, which makes it different from Confucianism, right? But this shaman, became quickly possessed by the little boy's spirit. Okay. Do I have a second photo of her? I think I do. She's now possessed by the little boy. She's crying. She's cold. It's dark. I miss my family. And she went around, the family was sitting on the floor of the hall, sitting around in a semicircle. She went around possessed by the spirit of the little boy and talked to each person as the little boy. And I can remember when she got to the younger brother of the father of the little boy, I remember possessed. She said, the little boy said, "Uncle, you were always so nice to me. You taught me how to ride a bicycle," this sort of thing. "I loved you so much." And there wasn't a dry eye, in the hall. I mean, just a whole, so I mean, talk about psychodrama. This is, very, very powerful, powerful stuff. Now, um, I've been talking for quite a while, but, I'm used to it. Teachers, we talk 50, 70 minutes, no sweat. But I don't want to, I don't want to go on too long. I was going to show you some photos of the rites done in the South, down near Busan, done for a drowning victim. And, if you want, I mean, I can show you those, or I can maybe show you some other time or during one of our chats, or just forget about it if you want. But anyway, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? I'm sure you've had some experience, seen some of these things yourself. Diane?
If I was planning here a funeral, I would go to a mortuary and I would pick the kinds of pieces of a service that I wanted and so on. Is that what's going on with the Kut, or is it a geographic? Because I'm in a location, I get that style.
I think the way this would work, this is not a funeral. The
Yeah, I
funeral
know,
is done
but a
separately.
parallel
But
thing.
in the months after someone's death, if they decide, for one reason or another, to do a Chinogi Kut, if you have a regular shaman, she will either preside over or will organize this, particular ritual for you. Now, if you
And
didn't,
so is it the area of the country I'm in, of the kind of Kut I get? Or it's I find the shaman who does the kind I want?
I think it's if you have a shaman that you regularly go to, even today, there's still lots of shamans out there. I think, that shaman would determine exactly, because, here in the Seoul area, like some of the shamans are from northern traditions. They're dying now. They're old. What was it? Kumwa, uh, the shaman, the famous one that did the boat rituals in Incheon and so forth. They were war refugees, Korean War refugees from the North. And so they've initiated their spirit daughters into, but those traditions, I'm not expert on all of them, of course, maybe none of them, but those Northern traditions are pretty similar to the Seoul's traditions, the Gyeonggi traditions. They're all part of this ecstatic, Kangshin Mu cultural phenomenon. And so one thing I think I should add, I think the hereditary shamans have largely disappeared. The ones from, Chola provinces and Gyeongsang provinces and so forth. They've largely disappeared with modernization because, they were necessary, but not considered particularly high class. And I suspect that a lot of them, were happy to discard that as they moved to the big cities and so forth. I think the ones that have been preserved, the ones that you could go see, or you might be able to see them at the United Nations, like the Shitkimgut is, that's been performed at the United Nations and, various overseas sites. That's the one from Chindo or, from Cholado. But the reason they've survived is they are intangible properties. They are supported. They're subsidized by the government. So, if the government has decided, in its sort of belated benevolence, the government's decided these shaman rituals are, we should try to preserve them. They designate. So the group that I met, I think they've probably all passed away now. It was like 20 or 30 years ago. But the group that I met that were the Hanyankut, the very fancy Yangban version of the Chinogikut, they were, intangible properties. In other words, they had been designated by the government, as the to continue that tradition. And I saw them perform that rite, up on a mountain in northern Seoul in a shrine. And just by, happenstance the first time, I stumbled into it. But, they were sort of famous, and I would see the musicians. I would see the musicians when I'd go to to some sort of concert or something, a folk music concert. And, I'd go up and talk to Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, he's passed away, but, he talked to my class once at that same shrine. I happened to run into him, and he came in and, talked to my students for an hour. Answering questions and telling hard to believe stories and so forth. But anyway, yeah, I think it's it's really interesting. One of my best friends, an old Korean friend, we're still friends, but she and her husband studied in Illinois. They got their PhDs in Illinois, and when she was very close to her father. And when her father died, she wasn't able to come back for the funeral. This was a long time ago, like probably 40, 50 years ago. And so anyway, when Young did come back, they had a Chinogikut for her father. Her family sponsored it. And when the shaman became possessed by her father, my friend Young and her husband are Catholics. They're still Catholics. They're long time Catholics. And when the shaman became possessed by her father, the shaman said, I always thought of you in America. I used to sit in the garden and watch the clouds pass overhead and think of you. And my Catholic friend, just fell apart because her father had written a letter to her saying exactly that, that I always sit in the garden and I watch the clouds go overhead. And so she just fell apart, when the shaman, possessed by her father said that. So of course, I'm a little bit of a skeptic, and I said, well, is that a common image in Korea? I mean, when you think about people who are far away, do you look at the clouds? And she said, no. And I said, well, would your father have probably shared that information with your mother or someone else? And she said, no way. He wasn't like that, because shamans are professional spies and information collectors. And they just do that professionally. They have incredible memories. They remember the slightest little tidbit of stories, and they can use that information for fortune telling, and when they become possessed and so forth. So that's a sort of, what do they call it in anthropology? Rather than the emic view, the insider's view, that's the more outside analytical view, but, how do shamans do this? How do they convince people, that they actually are possessed by the spirit of, how did the shaman know that that uncle taught the little boy how to ride a bike? I'm presuming, as a sort of a skeptic, I'm presuming the shaman collected, knew that family well, collected in her brain all this information and was able to pull it out and use it, or she was the little boy. I'm not sure. Any other, and the expense of these things, I'm not sure, but several years ago when I went to a kut, it was a rather fancy one, and I asked, how much did this cost? Like $3,000, 5,000, and they kept shaking their head. I said 10,000. They said no, 20,000, $20,000. It was a 2-day. 2-day. Usually the kut are done within 1 day. At least the northern tradition. But the price used to be $100 or something, back when we were there, or less. Okay, maybe $50. Now I wouldn't be surprised to have a day-long kut. The regular price might be 10,000. Chunmanwan now. I wouldn't be surprised. Prices of everything. Famously, apples. I saw that in the newspaper, and my wife just told me with shock in her voice, an apple costs 10,000 won at the store. But anyway, yeah. Any other questions or comments, experiences you want to share, Bobby?
Question. Your students are your students from the base, right? American military students.
And have been. I've taught for 50 years
Yeah.
on the base, either full-time or part-time. Yeah.
How do they react to this? Because there's so much conservative Christianity in the rampant in the United States now. You must have some of those people among your students. How do they react to this? Or
well, usually in the old days, the people that signed up for a shamanism course, tended not to be the sort of people you just described. But more recently, I haven't taught the shamanism course for a while, more than 10 years, I think, but I've incorporated the material into a couple of my upper level classes. So in an upper level class, which is the religions of East Asia, for the first field trip, I took a small group, 6 or 7 students, to a Buddhist temple for a temple stay. And this came up because there were 2 Christians in the group, and one of them was a girl who desperately needed the class, to get her associate degree. And the other was but anyway, they didn't want to bow at the service, at the
I remember you told us about that.
Yeah, I told you about that. They didn't want to bow. And when it came to 108 bows, they just sat. And the woman, who has since transferred, but my friend, Namgyong, was the head, the lead of the temple stay group. She said that had never happened before. But they asked me, my students came up to me, we went to 2 Yebul. The first Yebul is like the morning and evening service at a Buddhist temple. And the first time, the evening one they did, in the morning, one of them came over to me. We're all lined up with our temple stay uniforms, ready to start. There's like 50 people assembled at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And one of the guys sidles over to me and says, "Do we have to bow?" And I said, "No, you don't have to do anything." So they didn't. They can't remember. One stood and the other sat. But yeah, and when I took that same group, we went to the museum, Shamanism Museum, and we, had an hour-long talk with the curator there, Dr. Yang, who's kind of half a shaman himself, and then we went to one of the shrines that I showed you, the shrine where the woman, climbed up and got on the blades. And while we were in that neighborhood, we saw exorcisms going on and so forth. I had a bottle of expensive whiskey that's under my bed now, but I had it prepared. We could have gotten in. They didn't want to go in. They were hanging back, while the exorcism was going on. So yeah, it's Bobby, it's possible. That's the first time I've had that kind of experience, but it was okay. We just didn't spend as long a time, because I had sort of made friends. Because in one of the rooms where something was going on, the older shaman, I could hear what they were saying. I was just looking at my genius look of getting invited, and I was just standing there posing. And the younger shaman said to the older shaman, "What's that guy doing? What's that Harabaji doing there?" And she said, "Why are they here?" And the older woman said, "Kugyong Harawaza, they came here for sightseeing." And so forth. But then a man who was part of the group that was sponsoring the Kud, he came up and started talking to me. And he asked me, are you really interested in Buddhism? Laurel Kendall's made that point several times. Often at the folk level, they refer to shaman as Buddhism, because the shamans are probably Buddhists themselves.
Yeah.
But of course it's a separate tradition. And so I talked to this guy, for about 5 minutes, and I could have got us invited in there. There was a small group, but they didn't really want to go in. So I saved the bottle for another day, which is actually coming up next Saturday. There's a shaman festival in Northern Seoul, and I'll take the bottle and,
I think, Frank, one reason you get invited in so easily is because you look like that mountain god.
Well, I didn't in the old days. It looked more like the devil.
I'm teasing you, but yeah, but you do now.
Are there any other questions? I don't think I have time to show you one thing in the future. If you're interested in one of our conversations, just give me 1 second, please. Charlie, when Charlie's not here, but Charlie, in one of his talks, he showed a couple photos of a death rite. You can see this, right? This is from the book, the series that I just showed you, published in the 80s. But this is the this is the sumangkut for a drowned person. Here's the drowned man, and they've retrieved his soul from the ocean, and they're carrying it back. What they've done is, just like Charlie presented something very much like this before. What they did is they arranged with the family of this young man had died unmarried. And they found a family of a young girl, a young woman who had died unmarried. And because unmarried young people are going to be restless and unhappy and liable to come back and cause problems, and of course they're not happy. You love them. You want them to be happy. If you arrange a ghost marriage, if you arrange a marriage for them, they'll be much more placid and peaceful in paradise. And so what they did, this is the bride, a doll. Here's the table that's been set up. The doll is, the bride is bowing to her husband, This is the wedding picture. These people look even unhappier than they used to look in the typical wedding photo. Okay, these people are grief stricken, and this is the here's the bridal couple, and this is the hereditary tradition. I'm almost finished. And so they're dancing with a spirit boat. They've put clothes, wrapped them up into a reed conveyance there, not conveyance, but here's a possession. And this is the hereditary shaman or priestess. I'm Charlie. I'm tracking the time. And this is a neighborhood woman. You can read it. You can read it in Korean if you want. This is a neighborhood woman who becomes possessed by the soul of the dead man. So the priestesses, the shamans, do not become possessed in the Southern tradition, but often family members or neighbors who are capable of this experience get possessed and deliver messages from the dead. And as usual, here's the cloth or the silk bridge. And this is toward the end, of course, and they're escorting the couple to paradise. Usually it's to a honeymoon, right? Well, maybe it is a honeymoon. And, this is the finale on the beach. So I snuck that in. I got it in anyway. So let me stop the recording. How do I do that? Stop recording. Stop recording.